Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and coming up, Luke Falasca is going to give us a broker update. We also have Andrew Cox back with us with the shipper update, but first we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update, brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to your Wednesday carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland, and today we're going to look at that outbound tender rejection index, because for the first time in about a month, we've had one of the biggest jumps, a 24 basis point jump that is, in the outbound tender rejection index for the United States. So with that being said, it's still at a very low rate of about 3.56%. So, looking at this big giant tower that we saw in March, tender rejection rates, capacity, contracted rapidly then. We're still a long way away from where it was, and we're still a pretty good bit away of where it typically is this time of year. Again, we're starting to enter that period of time where people are starting to think about Memorial Day, taking some time off for a little bit. Potentially, there's not as much freight that has been moved historically at this time of year, but that being said, rejection rates going up at this point in time, it is a pretty decent signal for the carriers out there to watch for any kind of changing trends in capacity, because that means that you could be taking advantage of some increased activity on the spot market, regardless of the reason. So where are we seeing some of this rejection rate? What's driving it more significantly? So I've got the reefer outbound rejection rate here in the top in blue, and the van down there in the bottom in green. So van, of course, is the majority of the freight that we track here at FreightWaves. So the van rejection rate taking a pretty big jump. So it's driving a lot of what we're seeing in this tightening capacity, whereas the reefer rejection rate has actually fallen down over the last little bit, over the last day or so, I should say. The overall trend is still higher on the reefer end, so that's one day does not a trend make, but at the same time, a pretty big jump on the van. Again, there's more volume behind that, so it's going to have a more significant impact on the overall tender rejection rate in general. But again, reefer rejections still up there, still trending higher. Just one day down doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, we're softening significantly. So let's see where in the United States these rejection rates are being driven. So a good way to do that is the weighted rejection index. The weighted rejection index is a combination, of course, of weekly change in tender rejections and market share value. So larger the market, the more significant the change in tender rejection rate throughout the United States. So these markets up here are going to be the ones that are largely driving what you saw in the outbound tender rejection rate. I've got it sorted from highest to lowest here. Ontario, California, again, 4.043% of the entire United States outbound market, the second largest market in the United States right now, having a pretty big jump in tender rejection rates right now, so they are driving a lot of that rejection. Denver, Colorado, ironically, out there too. Not necessarily a market, we talked about it earlier in the week, not necessarily a market that you would think about in terms of capacity tightening, but Denver is one of those. Bouncing on down here, Fresno, California. Fresno, California showing up in the top 6 on the list. Not necessarily a traditional strong market for freight, but it is that time of year for produce. So let's break down the Fresno market. Fresno market outbound tender rejection index right here in the blue. You can see a huge jump in outbound tender rejection rates for Fresno, going all the way up to 5.13%, where it was hovering down below 1% for a little bit at the end of April. So capacity tightening significantly. On the top of that, I've got this agricultural rate, the ag rate, as we call it here, reported by the USDA. You can see a big trend and increasing rate for that ag rate, jumping all the way up. The average spot market rate for moving reefer, $44.50, an all-in rate, including fuel and other accessorials as well. So it is increasing from below 4,000 just a few weeks ago. Now it is on the way back up. So trending higher on the spot market in the produce, that's Central Florida or Central California Valley, as I should say, where a lot of those lettuce, strawberries, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli are moving out of there right now. Looking at the Fresno market broken down, you can see reefer rejection rates and van rates going up simultaneously over here. The purple line, it's hard to see right there, 15.89% on the reefer rejection rate, only a 2.88 on the van rate out of Fresno, but it is a significant reefer market. So anybody that's hauling that produce or has an impact to produce is feeling that right now in the Fresno market. And that'll do it for today's Carrier Update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Luke Falasca bringing you another broker update, and volumes are continuing to rise. We'll see if this continues or if this is just a short little rise and then we settle back down. Time will tell, but for the moment, volumes are up. So this blue line here, we've got this on seasonality mode. So what this means is in blue, you've got 2020 volume levels. We're up again day over day from yesterday. So we're sitting at 10,134 there on that index number. To give you a little bit of perspective, the green line, that is 2019 volume level. So we're sitting approximately 6% above that number. And then the orange line is actually 2018 volume levels. So we're sitting about 1% below those. So we're actually very close to where we were this time last year on 2018 volume levels. Again, time will tell if this holds, but for the moment, things are on the rise. And we're going to look at where are the best places to call here shortly. Next chart here is the rejection rates, though. Rejections are still lagging a little bit, although they are up a little bit day over day as well. That blue line is the overall tender rejection rate in the United States, sitting at just above 3.5%. So as that continues to rise, you'll start to see spot market rates rise as well as tighten up capacity, although it is still very, very loose. So don't get me wrong, it's not tight yet, but it is beginning to come off that bottom more and more. This purple line here that you see, those are actually the reefer tender rejections, always a little bit more volatile than the van. Those dipped down. We're off. They were sitting around that 4.5% mark there at the beginning of May or late April, and we're sitting right around just under 8% right now, which is down off of their high 2 days ago. They have dipped down these last couple of days, but we'll see if that continues. They might push back up as more and more produce demand hits the market. Next here, we'll see our map of the day. So remember, this is weekly volume change. It's very important to know not every market is created equal, right? Just because volume levels are continuing to increase across the board doesn't mean it's happening in every market. Some markets will increase faster, some will decrease faster. And this is very important when trying to figure out where the demand is to land new customers. So over here, remember, markets in blue are having the greatest increase in freight volumes. Markets in red are having the greatest decrease. The white markets are still increasing, but just kind of a slight increase, maybe a 1, 2, or 3% gain, versus some of these blue markets are seeing double-digit gains. So over here, West Coast, for the most part, pretty much outside of Portland, the West Coast has seen a lot of growth, a lot of blue here. Remember, the blue is substantial gains, and then the white would be moderate gains. So LA, San Diego, Fresno, even a little bit in Seattle. Seattle's going to be a bit more of a mild gain, but it's still seeing some gains here. Texas, for the most part, outside of those cross-border areas, like Laredo, outside of some of those areas, it's still increasing and seeing very good growth. If you remember from yesterday, though, the Southeast was pretty much all red, and today it's flipped. It's about 50% red, 50% white. Now, that white is still an increase in volume, not substantial, so if you are focusing on areas to call today, I'd focus on some of these areas here in Texas, like Austin, San Antonio. LA is a good place to hit, Fresno, as well as a few other areas here in the northern parts. You might find some luck there in Milwaukee. The market we're going to focus on today, though, is going to be Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, volume levels are rising in Pittsburgh, not at a substantial rate, but they are increasing. What is surprising, though, is the rate that their tender rejections are rising. If you look here on this chart, the blue line is the overall tender rejection level here in Pittsburgh, sitting at just under 5%, so a good 1.5% above the national average. And it's really started to rise since only 1 week ago, since the 12th, when it was sitting at about 1.5%. Now, the green line is 2019 rejections, so you can see that we are far above that. So increase spot market rates out of Pittsburgh, and you should have some good luck. That'll do it.
Voices from every corner of the supply chain concerning all modes of transportation. From the world's largest logistics podcast network, this is what the freight tech revolution sounds like. Freightcast presented by FreightWaves. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to your shipper update. I'm here with Andrew Cox. Andrew, what's the latest?
Anthony, no sector of the economy is going to go unscathed through this coronavirus, and we got the data from the Commerce Department on the new housing starts and housing permits in April, and it showed that the housing sector wasn't immune either. So as we said the last couple of weeks, we're going to see a lot of record drops in data. We saw another record drop here with our housing start data. They tumbled 30% sequentially from March to April. So this is the lowest level since 2015 at an adjusted annualized rate of 891,000. It just shows some of the softness here. I mean, a lot of the home builders were deemed essential in most states, but not only did they stop work to keep people safe, but also they're seeing a lack of demand, most likely moving forward. So the housing starts are now back where they were in 2015.
Right, and Andrew, one of the things that we see is that housing starts was doing a pretty decent job of having a steady growth, and we saw a surge towards the end of last year. Even though we've had this slow and steady growth, it still hasn't reached anywhere near where it was 2006, 2007 levels. One of the things that we did see, even though growth was so strong and it declined last month, or I should say in March, it was still above year-ago levels. So that just kind of speaks to how strong housing starts were going before the pandemic and even kind of in the midst of it.
Yeah, the back half of 2019 was very strong. We hit a little bit of a blip there in 2018 that kind of, you can see it there, that stunted some of the growth. But it was a very slow and steady growth rate since 2008. But one thing I wanted to look at was the disparities regionally between housing starts, because you can actually see there's a lot of coincidences where these regions were also the places that were most hardest hit by COVID-19, at least thus far. So the Northeast and the West are the places that were hit both the hardest sequentially and on a yearly basis, where the Midwest and the South fared a little bit better. So you can see that the COVID-19 likely does have an impact directly on the different regions.
Right, and one of the other big things is, thankfully, when we're looking at the South, that's one of the largest regions when we're looking at new housing starts. Of course, Northeast, one of the smaller regions, but definitely a little bit skewed when we're looking at this region, because a lot of it's going to be looking at multifamily homes instead of single family. And I believe in the latest month, multifamily got hit the hardest. It's a very volatile segment, but definitely a hard hit for the Northeast sector. The West Coast, definitely the second largest segment when we're looking at housing starts, and as you mentioned, definitely one of the hardest hit regions in addition to the Northeast. Yeah,
you're right. There was people most often look at the single family because it's less volatile and kind of gives you a better read on the U.S. economy. But you're right, the multifamily was down 40% month over month across the entire U.S. And we can take a second to look at housing permits. This is basically a forward leading indicator of the housing starts. And again, it tumbled over 20% in April. It's likely going to fall forward. It likely could fall forward again in May. I don't think this is the end of the slump. But that being said, the home builders confidence index did rise in May. They're seeing a little bit of firming of the bottom. So my hope is that things do pick up from here.
That's exactly right. We did see a tick up in the home builders confidence. So many are expecting that April might be the trough for home builders and housing starts, and be interesting to see what the recovery process is like. Definitely one of the things that we mentioned, one of the first industries to probably come back online and cause a bit of a resurgence. Andrew, thank you so much for this update.
Welcome, my man.
And thank you so much for tuning in. That's going to do for the shipper update, but the content doesn't stop here. You can check out Andrew and the rest of his team on FreightWaves on FreightWaves.com, and check out our FreightWaves TV app on all your favorite streaming platforms. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.